Welcome back. Alicia, we'll give you a last word on this, but to keep with the theme, I agree with Kim that I wonder if this is these kinds of laws and Florida passing maybe the first one, other states coming on board, will create a more fundamental change in the kind of internet culture that we have right now. There's that famous cartoon of a couple of dogs sitting in a desk chair, and the caption is, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And yet the plea from Florida and these parents, it sounds like, is that there has to be some way to verify who these users are. And I don't know about the idea of anonymous verification, if people are really going to be thrilled with the idea of uploading photos of their driver's licenses, for example, and sending it across the internet to some sort of company who is supposed to check whether they are providing parental consent to the use of an account. Maybe it would be a model of something more like going through your phone company. Your phone company knows who you are generally, has your information and your name, your real name, and your credit card information and so forth. Alicia, I guess I can't see quite totally around this corner, but it's possible we would get to a model where social sites are operating more on that kind of model, maybe with verifications going through Verizon or AT&T or something like that, rather than this sort of click the button and we'll give you a new account system that they've been using.
Right. And I think the one proposal that the tech companies have actually proposed, these platforms have proposed, is to go through the app stores. There's two app stores in the US, essentially. There's the Google Play and there's the Apple App Store. And when parents buy their kids' phones, they have to send the app store and they get all this information. So that's one easy way to kind of verify the ages. And to your point about the driver's licenses, I don't think Americans really want to be feeding that information to TikTok and for it to be sent back to China. Now, just on another point, I think conservative parents are actually, if you look at the polling, are much more supportive of this kind of legislation than liberal parents. And they actually impose more restrictions on their teens' social media use than liberal parents do. And so this is actually, I think, a fundamental broader cultural issue and cultural problem, because some parents, if you actually look at the polls, don't see this as social media as a problem. They don't think that the government should be. About half parents don't think that their teens are spending excessive use on social media, even though the average teen spends about 5 hours a day. And so I think there needs to be a larger, just like there was, back in the 90s, that tobacco is harmful. There needs to be a larger public education, public campaign, and maybe by Florida, by essentially stigmatizing the use, maybe help contribute to solving this problem.
Speaking of the Apple App Store, however, that features in a new lawsuit brought last week by the U.S. government, which accuses Apple of monopolizing smartphone markets, in the language of the Justice Department press release. Let's listen to Attorney General Merrick Garland explaining why the DOJ is bringing this action.
Apple has maintained monopoly power in the smartphone market not simply by staying ahead of the competition on the merits, but by violating federal antitrust law. Consumers should not have to pay higher prices because companies break the law. We allege that Apple has employed a strategy that relies on exclusionary, anti-competitive conduct that hurts both consumers and developers.
Alicia, let me throw this back to you because I know you have looked closely at this lawsuit. Just for background, Apple is about 55% of the smartphone market in the United States. So what is the government alleging here, and what do you make of its claims?
It's a very blunderbuss lawsuit. It makes a number of claims, and they're not really targeted. One claim regards or relates to its app store and the commissions that it charges developers or apps that for purchases. Now, this doesn't apply to any old app, only if you actually, for instance, buy a WSJ subscription or buy a Netflix subscription through its app store, then Apple will charge me a 30% commission on that, or sometimes less if it's a smaller, or it's an app that has fewer downloads. And it says basically that this is a tax on users, notwithstanding that there are ways for companies and users to get around that you can buy subscription on your PC, for instance. There are other arguments there, for instance, that the Apple suppressed mobile cloud streaming videos by requiring each to be submitted as a standalone app for approval. So basically the complaint here is that Apple isn't just approving all of Activision Blizzard's or another company's video game apps in bulk. There's no real requirement that it does so in antitrust law or any other federal law. And the complaint, at least I kind of laughed out loud when I was reading this. It seems to be that it's not making it easier for Microsoft, by the way, just purchased Activision Blizzard, isn't making it easier to augment its own kind of monopoly, or at least according to the FTC, it is a monopoly. So the antitrust cops can't even keep their monopolists straight. And then there you go through the lawsuit, and it's pretty clear that it's trying to essentially protect these bigger companies from competition, like Visa, MasterCard, and some of the big banks and the financial companies that don't want the fintech competition.
Kim, what's your read of this suit? I guess one thought I have is that it seems like one of the things that the critics of Apple want is to break open its closed system. And so you hear complaints that Apple should allow other app stores on the phone and make it more open like the Android system. But my thought there is that part of what Apple sells to consumers in the United States is the idea that you are in Apple's closed system. And one of the things that comes along with that is security, that everything you go in the App Store and put on your phone has been vetted by Apple's tech experts, that it is not spyware and so forth.
Yeah, security, quality, privacy. Everybody understands that they have a choice right now if they go out between the Android open system and iPhone's closed system. And many people choose deliberately to go into that iPhone universe. But by the way, I'm an example of that. I do not want an Android phone for a number of reasons. And this is interesting because we've actually had a similar complaint like this. Epic Games a while ago made a complaint saying that, Apple should have to allow other app stores and payment options into its universe. And there were two courts that said no. And they made this argument that people aren't locked into Apple. They rather are there because it satisfies them and it's something that they want to have. And, a bunch of the things that came out in that suit also pointed out why this is a very, very poor antitrust action by the Department of Justice. One of the complaints, for instance, is that it is somehow retarding tech innovation, that because they have this closed loop that you're not getting the innovation that consumers deserve. And that's just nonsense. Look at what Apple has itself produced in the past decade, whether it's AirPods or its Vision Pro headset, new functions for its Apple Watch. But look at the innovations outside of it. In places, by the way, too, that Apple isn't necessarily competing very well at the moment. Artificial intelligence is one. We've had new kind of innovations in headsets, bone conduction headphones. There's all kinds of stuff that's moving ahead at leaps and bounds. Apple's little universe, or big universe, I should say, of closed apps and app stores is not standing in the way of greater innovation. And nor is there really a price argument, too. As Alicia said, I mean, this is essentially, it's like the Department of Visa lawsuit or the Department of Google lawsuit. It's simply a lawsuit that's working on behalf of other giant players out there in the industry.
Hang tight. We'll be right back after one more break. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's close with a letter from a listener. Russ in Connecticut writes in on the discussion yesterday about Truth Social, President Trump's social media site that has gone public. He says, we've commented that Trump media may be very valuable if Donald Trump is elected president and uses Truth Social as his communication platform. However, would he be able to do so if by using the platform in any official or unofficial capacity, he would be enhancing his own business interests? Would that be the equivalent of intentionally hosting government functions at Mar-a-Lago to benefit himself and thus prohibited by law? I have a couple thoughts, and then I'll throw it to you, Kim, for a last word. One is that we almost had that kind of situation, not at Mar-a-Lago, but at the Trump Doral in Florida. Remember, in 2019, the administration was trying to figure out where to host the G7 summit. And amazingly, it was determined internally that the Trump National Doral Resort in Miami would be the perfect place for it. You had the announcement come out, then you had Mick Mulvaney came out and explained that there were 8 other places that were looked at, but the Trump property just happened to be perfect. He did say this, however: I don't talk about how this place runs on the inside. If you want to see our paper on how we did this, the answer is absolutely not. And Kim, what happened was that they reversed that decision after much public criticism. And so I think it would be maybe a perception issue for the president, as that was, more than a legal issue. But it would be interesting, because my recollection is that when President Trump was on Twitter, he would sometimes make announcements that to me looked like official government announcements on social media. And if he did that, he would be putting, I think, his social posts under the protection of the First Amendment. There was this case from the Supreme Court just recently on this, local government officials who were posting things on their sites. And what the Supreme Court said was that if there are official actions that are taking place on social media, they are official government actions. And those local officials are not allowed to block citizens, residents from those pages. And so you could have a situation, it would be fascinating to watch it play out in the courts, where President Trump is posting things on Truth Social that look like official announcements. And so in some way they're covered by the First Amendment, but maybe we'll have to wait and get the court case in order to see what that looks like.
And it will come, believe me. I mean, it's a great question, because it reminds us of the many thorny questions that would again be rocketed to the forefront if Donald Trump wins the White House. And you were just talking about some of the legal ones. And, you know, it's a good place to start, because we started this talking about social media. And obviously there's going to be more court cases in which the Supreme Court and others attempt to sort through what exactly social media is. Is it a public forum? Are there certain rules, therefore, attendant to it? The other, though, is the financial question. And I mean, let's not forget, this was a huge drama the entire 4 years Donald Trump was in office, in part because there were a number of recommendations made to him at the beginning of his term as to how to handle all of his assets and his empire in a way that conformed with the federal government's and sort of ethics experts' views of what is the most ethical situation. He ignored a lot of those, to much criticism. And this is going to pose a new one. But, you know, the other thing that's interesting about this, and an argument that I would wager that the Trump folks will make, is that why do we have Truth Social? It was because even though Donald Trump was a big user of Twitter, and as you note, a lot of his official announcements and information came out on social media. In the wake of January 6th, all of these big companies band together and essentially banned him and threw him off. And that raised all kinds of situations on its own about the power of these firms. Are these social media companies the public square? Can you do that to elected officials? You know, they pointed out that they're private concerns. But all of this kind of combined to a number of shifts and changes in the social media world, and of course, the creation of Truth Social. So are you going to now suggest that this one venue that Donald Trump knows for certain he isn't going to be thrown off of anytime soon, are you going to foreclose that to him, put him back at the potential mercy of other media companies, social media companies that may or may not like things he has to say and may or may not choose to throw him off again? Some of them have relaxed those bans, by the way. It's a very, very thorny, complex question that, as I said, encompasses legal issues and Donald Trump's own financial issues.
Thank you, Kim and Alicia. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.